are a few things I want to ask you. I'm not recording the video. There are a few things I want to ask you in reference to this, just for clarification, so people understand what your ties are to this. First things first, you're the owner of Borzack Design, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the business.
Basically, do principal thing was kitchen design, and then I handle it from start to finish.
You do
Buy
good
the cabinets, so on, factory cabinets, or have somebody build them, whatever it takes.
Sure.
But I also have done bathrooms, and I've also done complete remodeling projects. So, especially around here.
Some home theater stuff too, right?
And home theater.
Look at the website.
Before the words weren't even there. So,
Really? So you're
yeah, when I was in it, I came back. I have background with Ampex Corporation, makes magnetic tape. I got involved with audio video stuff early on in my professional career. So, and I hooked up with Tenzel's, Jack Tenzel, which was an audio video supplier. But they never, they just supplied the equipment.
Sure.
No cabinets. And when he realized I did cabinet design and all this other stuff and understood what was required for audio video stuff, it's unique. And so we partnered up for several years,
right,
building some pretty, as you saw from the website, some pretty incredible. But what had happened in the future after that is that the contractors caught on to this and saw this as a way to make money.
Sure.
And so they would always talk their clients into, oh, we can build that for you, but they can't design it. So
it's a bit of dishonesty there, it sounds like.
it went on, it kind of slowed down.
Sure,
So
sure.
I only got into some specialty stuff instead when they
Sure. I wanted to ask, what's your relationship to Randy and to the ENVISION CAYCE project?
Randall, you mean?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I've heard his name said.
I don't know of anybody that calls him Randy.
I think Chuck called him Randy when I first.
Did he?
And that was actually my confusion because I know people
Okay.
Randall, they really go by Randy. It's either one or the
I
other.
don't even think his wife calls him Randy.
I'll stick to Randall then. What's your relationship to Randall and the ENVISION
Well,
CAYCE?
I don't know if we said this or not, but I was running for consul in 2011. And the top priority on my list was to do something about Casey.
Sure.
Against everybody's recommendation. They said, Bob, that's suicidal. They're going to eat your lunch. It's an impossible task, et cetera, et cetera. I said, sorry, it's got to be done.
Sure.
And then I had a brain aneurysm.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. And so it cut my campaign a bit short. But I got out of the hospital on election day. And was here, well, not here, but the crime meeting.
Sure.
And Randall happened to be there, and we were talking about Casey, and he heard me talking about it. And he says, let's sit together and talk about this. And I said, okay. So we did. And from that point, we decided to start an organization to do something about it.
So you both co-founded the CAYCE Foundation, is that correct?
The Casey Revitalization
Yes,
Foundation.
my
right.
apologies. The CAYCE
Right.
Revitalization. You both
Right.
are co-founders of CAYCE Revitalization.
Mm-hmm.
What was Randy's interest in the CAYCE?
He had been involved with other projects similar in California and Chicago.
Gotcha.
And so he saw the need, as I did. Said the key to success in this stuff is education for the kids.
Sure.
And if that's not part of the equation, it's going to fail.
Okay.
And then we got wind of Purpose-Built Communities
Sure.
organization. We went to, I think it was their second or third annual conference, the first time we went over there.
Sure.
And we're blown away. Just sit there and say, how can anybody argue with this concept? This
Sure.
is incredible. And so from that point on, we were promoting that Now you had Martha O'Brien, which was kind of like, they didn't like the fact that we were getting involved.
Really? Because you were like outsiders or what?
Not outsiders.
They were worried.
Arrogant.
Really?
Is what there were. Is that she says, we already do that. I says, our response was, if you're already doing it, then why do you still have the same players after 5 years and 10 years? You got lifelong residents there that live at Cayce.
Right.
The ideal is that you get them out of there, that they
Right.
don't need to be there anymore. And she didn't like that. And she was very hostile to us. Hostile. She didn't like our involvement because she thought we were already doing this. You guys are. Well, the fact is, she never even thought about what we were doing. And there was no money, of course, for any of this stuff other than what they provided through their organization, which was considerable. And which is why MDHA liked them. Because they had this money that they could work off of. Well, long story short, basically we kept pushing on our behalf and purpose-built community, try to get people involved. And the biggest thing we had was the plan. We got that mass. When Phil Ryan was still running MDHA, he was reluctantly supportive of what our efforts were. And we convinced him a plan would be a good, and he managed to find the money through the council to get authorization for a master plan for Cayce. And so that was a 1-year process. Did our best to get the residents involved in the process. First couple of months we couldn't, and the head of it, John Zerker, Neighborhood Association, Cayce, he says, they've been through this before. And it's always met with disappointment. And
So MDHA, you said that MDHA had money and they were interested in your idea because they thought that they could back it. Is that what you said?
No.
I'm sorry. I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear because there was audio. What were you?
Right. Well, MDHA kind of looked at it. Let me see if I can get this right.
Take your time.
The sequel of events. We figured we needed political clout is what we needed. And I've been working with this kind of stuff for years as a neighborhood advocate. And one of our neighbors was the head of, what was he the head of? Richard Bernhardt. God, that was quick.
Oh, that was very quick.
Workshop sandwich and
That's
mac
great,
and
thank you
cheese. All
so
right.
much.
Gumbo and fried green tomatoes. How are you? Get a spoon for you. I'll be right back.
Thanks. Who was he at? Planning Commission.
Okay.
And he was very supportive of what we were trying to do as well. And so we used him to get us, thank you, introduced.
That was fast. Do you guys
It
need anything
was.
else from me right now?
Can I bug you for more coffee?
Yeah, absolutely.
We used Rick to get us in. Eventually we got to see the mayor. Got an audience with him and all the people on down the line.
Mayor
Of course,
Carlton.
yeah, I mean, it's just, so eventually people started saying, you know, this might be good work, you know. So
Right.
Phil Ryan went along with it, got the plan and the funding for the plan approved. It was a lot of money at the time. Of course, it's a massive project, largest one in the city.
Sure.
So anyhow, but then things went awry for Phil, and he had to resign. And so the next person that came in was Harbison, and he knew about the plan, and basically had a neighborhood meeting
Right.
with the Cayce residents and told them, I know you've seen this plan and been told this is going to happen, but don't count on it. Don't get your hopes up.
So there's a lot of resistance, it sounds like. over the
Well,
course of the life of this project. Is that fair to say?
well, yeah. I mean, it was like you said, the head of the neighborhood association. He wasn't for it. He says we've been through this before. You're making promises you can't keep, etc., kind of thing.
Gotcha. You said real quick. You said that Randy had worked on other projects like this before. What cities was that? Do you know?
I think Chicago and L.A. area, but I wouldn't take that as gospel there.
No,
You're going to be talking to him, so you'll get that background from him.
No, that's what I wanted to.
Yeah.
Want to do that.
But anyhow, that's so that was his motivation. He's seen it work. And city's much bigger than.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Is everything tasting all right so far?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome.
And the city's that much bigger than Nashville.
Right.
So we carried on, but Harbison kind of deflated our progress somewhat by the way he came in. And of course, we were talking education. He says, well, MDHA doesn't get involved with education stuff, and so on. I said, well, you want to do it right, you have to. And so basically, we laid it low for about 3 months after he came in, maybe even longer than that. We backed off. I said, he's got to do his thing, and he's in charge. So right now, we're kind of like at a standstill. And all of a sudden, he started calling meetings again.
Okay.
And they were leaning towards the plan. Wow. Either somebody told him higher up than him, he says, no, this really needs to happen. And regardless, I don't know what motivated him to be supportive of this thing. Sure. Now all of a sudden he's in full support.
Sure.
As of about a month ago.
Really?
He had a meeting on it. Unfortunately, it wasn't attended by too many of the neighborhood people. But he essentially told them, he says, this is going to be mixed income development. Every apartment's going to look the same.
Right.
Doesn't matter what income level you are. You're not going to say, there's rent-paying people going to live here, and market rate live here, and so on.
They're all going to be fully dispersed and jumbled together.
Integrated.
Gotcha.
And if you look at the video that was done by Purpose Built Community involving Columbia Park down in New Orleans, and they interviewed a lot of the residents. Of course, they had a step above us because they had all that financing after a hurricane came through and destroyed.
Gotcha. So there's an even bigger need to revitalize. It sounds like with that.
Well, there's nothing there
I
anymore.
mean,
it was like under 6 feet of water, if I remember the figures.
I want to ask, switching gears with this, there are a few things that I want to talk about in regards to the. I think that there is a bit of misinformation out there, as well as a lack of knowledge. I personally stood on one of the corners at the Casey Homes area and tried to engage people, get their thoughts on it. And I chatted with 5 people, and none of the 5 people were able to tell me anything concrete about it. I think 2 of them didn't want to talk, but I think 3 of them were legitimately in the dark on the issue. So, and I know that not only the meetings have made sure to try to engage the community as much as possible, but they've kept minutes and they have tried to make the meetings as accessible, if not physically, then digitally. So I would ask, in your perspective, do you think a lot of the residents are filled in on what's going on? Okay.
I mean, and again, the reason is, for the most part, they're skeptical that it's really going to happen. But the skepticism has rolled back a little bit. There seems to be a group of people who understand what's going on.
Sure. Do you?
But again, since nobody participates in the meetings, the
Right.
group meetings, they're not informed.
Right.
And John Zerker's not going to, the neighborhood advocate, or
Yeah.
the neighborhood president, is not very helpful.
Right.
And not necessarily as a negative, it's just that he's had years of experience and failure and promises not kept type of thing.
Do you think that people trust MDHA? Because it seems like the impression that I'm getting is that some people, and I'm not from East Nashville. I can't comment on the relationships between the two. That's something that's out of my view. But it seems like there's some people who are hesitant to trust MDHA, maybe because of, as you said, failed promises or a lack of a follow through. Or, I mean, it also seems like there's been a change in some of the personnel over the last few years, based on just what I've seen in the ENVISION CAYCE report. That there's some names mentioned that I couldn't immediately find. I don't know if that's just because my research was incomplete. Thank you so much.
There is a level of mistrust, there's no question about it. But they also have grown dependent upon what MDHA does because they're in charge of the upkeep.
Right. Sure.
And if you walked around there and saw those things, you saw air conditioning window units hanging out, obviously not working well, if at all. The place is a mess.
Sure. No, and again, I visited it myself, and of course I can't write about any of this in the article because it wouldn't be objective, but I saw 6 sheriff's cars there. Granted, they didn't have their guns drawn, I mean, they were just there. And I saw, a mom have to spank her kid in the street, and I saw people cruising up and down, so it's like, to me, it seems that there's I don't want to say like a Wild West feel, but just going there and not knowing anything about it, it seems that not a lot of people are paying attention, and because of that, you have people who feel that they can do, whatever.
Well, there's been a lot of things. I mean, there was, a cop shooting case a few months back, weeks actually. People murdered, in almost every case, it was from people who don't live in Cayce.
Really?
And the traffic that comes in there, they're doing a lot of things now. As a beginning, to provide better security. A lot more cameras, high-def cameras. We're going to be getting one of the fiber optic systems in Cayce, which is part of the master plan. That they'll all have internet access.
But no one's monitoring those cameras, according to Director of
Not
Communications
yet.
Jamie Berry.
Not
Well, they said that they don't have the intention to, that they didn't have the bandwidth to do that. Not to mention they weren't interested in that.
Obviously.
I brought that up to some people, and it's sort of the dynamic of hotels. Like if someone gets attacked, say in a hotel, and someone's not watching the cameras, it, in theory, can create a false sense of security, and the person can turn around and sue the hotel.
Exactly.
So I would worry about that dynamic if people aren't watching. I mean, I'm a massive civil liberties guy, and I abhor the concept of security cameras, but by the same token, if you have them, there's sort of a societal obligation, I guess. And again, that's not per me, that's per what I understood of the legal system. A societal obligation to monitor said cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So if people know the cameras aren't being monitored, that they're just for the sake of prosecution after the fact, will that have the same effect, do you think, of if they were being monitored like these mobile camera units from police stations?
As a preventative measure,
Yes.
that's yet to be proven. They can do that. I think the biggest level of success is going to be based on the participation of the residents. if they feel confident that the police are serious about solving these issues, resolving these issues, preventing them from happening in the first place, that you'll start seeing a different attitude.
Sure.
The last time they had a scuffle over there, several police cars, and all the bad guys were from outside Cayce. Every one of them had been arrested, and so on. And the residents weren't afraid to sit there and watch all this happening. And they would identify these people so that they don't live here.
Right.
And so they were in effect supporting the police activity. And because obviously they're getting tired of it.
Sure. Would you say the crime has gone down in the last few years from Cayce? I understand overall that the neighborhood has seen improvements from the way it was in, say, the 1990s. But do you think that, just talking on the recent surge, the recent activity, that it seems that there's a surge in interest of police monitoring? Now, I know Director Jamie Berry told me, Director Communications, Berry had told me that overall crime had gone down, and that it was part of a positive, trend. But I'm trying to get people to actually give me data on that. You know what I mean? Because she didn't want to go on the record saying that.
Police will have all that information.
When I reached out to them, I'm actually waiting on the request.
Yeah. I mean, they've got it in great detail, as a matter of fact, and break out the type of crime, you know, assaults, rapes, murders, etc., etc.
Item by
gun
item.
involved, and so on.
Right.
They've got all the data, and they're, at least at our weekly crime meetings that we have on Thursdays at lunch. I think that. Have you been to one of those meetings?
No, sir, I have not. I've not had the pleasure.
Really, this is part of the process.
What day? Thursday?
Thursday, every Thursday, 11 o'clock at Drifters.
11 a.m. p.m.?
Mm-hmm.
Which one?
11 a.m.
11 a.m. At Drifters?
Drifters, yeah, which is top of the hill here.
It's a bar? Restaurant? What is it?
Restaurant bar.
Okay. Sounds good. Give me a second. I'm going to actually wash my hands.
I do that all the time.
Force of habit. Even though it's gone for like 10 seconds.
I constantly lock the doors in our house.
Right. Well, I don't blame you. There's nothing wrong with being security. Okay, so let's talk about the actual population management of the incumbent residents there. So there are a few things that I wanted to talk to you about this. I know that Randy had said that one of, if not the, model for success is East Lake Meadows, correct?
Yes, in Atlanta.
Yes, that's the neighborhood that in the 90s was revitalized with this mixed income project. So I did some.
It was much worse in Cayce.
Sure. And the crime has gone down overall by 70%, but violent crime I think has gone down by 90%.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an incredible turnaround. Plus, kids are going to college.
Right. I would ask though, because I found not one but two articles citing, one of which actually cited the attorney who I just reached out to. He's an Emory University professor. His name's Frank Alexander. According to the two articles I found, one from governing.com and one from nextcity.org, only 25% of the families returned to East Lake Meadows after the construction. It's my understanding that it was a 3-year construction process from 1995 to 98, and that over that period, only a fourth of the families came back. That there was also a lawsuit involved with some of the people not returning, that Mr. Frank Alexander is actually responsible for filing the lawsuit. Granted, it wasn't successful. It never took off, so to speak. But I would ask, if East Lake Meadows is the model for success, and you have a fourth of the families not returning, I would ask, is that part of the success model for what will be Cayce? Because I know that there are some issues between legitimate displacement versus, people not meeting the stringent level of requirements for return, such as having a criminal record.
Right. The process at East Lake, it moved everybody off the property.
Thank you so much.
Relocated them.
One more cup would be great.
Through Section 8 housing for them. And one of the reasons for not returning, if you had a kid, started going to school, and he was out for 2 years somewhere else, you've got accustomed to the new neighborhood, got accustomed to the new school, and what was going on in the revitalization, that means relocating again.
Yeah.
The kid, may have been fine in school now. He
Right.
enjoyed the school he was in, and chances are he very much, because Section 8 housing was blended in with regular neighborhoods.
Sure.
And so so a lot of parents didn't want to disrupt the family to move back.
You see that as an improvement of the quality of living conditions that 3/4 of the people didn't return. Is that fair to say? That they were able to, they were actually able to do better in other areas.
Yeah, East Lake was an absolute disaster.
Okay.
It was a shooting match.
Well,
People
sure.
were deathly afraid of themselves, so when they were relocated for this revitalization into other neighborhoods that were safer, that were no gunfire and all of that, I should say no, there's never no, but their lives had stabilized and improved tremendously.
Sure.
So the incentive to return back to East Lake really wasn't there. And of course, at that time it was considered to be an experiment.
Right.
And so people aren't stupid. They know what's going on. They say, okay, how do we know it's really going to work?
Sure.
And are we going to like it, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of them just hedged their bets and stayed where they were, didn't return. And I don't know what the Emory guy said about why they didn't return.
I actually reached out to him to get forgive me for cutting you off. I reached out to him to get a statement, just to get his clarification on the issue, because one of the articles I found was from 2015, and the other article I found was from 2001. But it seems like some of the problem with that too is that there's misinformation in Atlanta, and that people aren't really sure about where the residents went. From what I've gathered, that there's some people who think that their lives dramatically improved. There's some people who look at the lawsuit and say, well, how can this be, if people's lives were improving? So that's my job as someone whose goal is to be objective here. My job is to cut through the noise and figure out what happened. So on that note, I would go back and ask with, thank you so much, with the East Lake Meadows experiment, you had only 25% of the people staying at the residence. Should the readers of the East Nashvillian expect a similar turnover, whether or not it's good or bad?
That's one of the things that I admire what Harbison is doing. We have enough empty property in Cayce that we can actually build a building next to the existing building.
Sure.
And they can move into it while they're building their new facility. So therefore, they don't have to leave their neighborhood. They don't have to leave their schools.
Sure.
None of this relocation stuff is going on.
Sure.
And so supposedly it will help resolve that issue. They still have the option to leave if they want to. If
Right,
don't
they get
like what's
first
going
refusal.
on. Sure.
I would ask, too, I mean, this is, because there's some weird things I've noticed with the budget. You know, I've talked to the folks at NVHA, and they currently aren't sure what the budget is. It was originally projected at $602 million. I have heard maybe some conflicting numbers. Some would say $630 million. And when I chatted with, I think, Ben from NVHA, he had told me that it was closer now to $400 million. So that brings up a few points. First off being, if you've got a third of your budget potentially being cut out with what he claims is an effort to save taxpayer money, why was the budget priced so high in the first place?
Well, I'd venture to guess it should be even higher. So, and now that the schools have become part of the equation, and there was a restructuring into how HUD backs up the money
Right.
that's being used.
Right.
And there's one building that's in process of being rebuilt now, but it was under the old system, which was strictly low-income housing replacement. The one that's going on now, which is the Kirkpatrick development, which includes the school, and that's under the new HUD arrangement, which requires mixed income development. And so the money's being loaned on a far different manner. And Randall will address this much better than I do. He understands that stuff beautifully.
No, and I'll go to him
And
specifically to get
can
that
explain it, how that's going to work. Well, Harbison also seems got a good grasp of the financial end of it. And that last meeting we had was, I mean, Randall and I are just sitting there says, my God, he's got it. He's figured it out.
Sure.
He's going to make it work. I'm convinced, of course, I'll always be skeptical because you never know what the government's going to do next.
Right.
So, but regardless, it's far enough along now that if they don't do it, they're going to look awfully bad.
Right.
That they're not helping people in need and so on and so forth.
So this is past the point of no return, you would say, with this project, that they can't back out now? Or that you think that they can't back out?
I feel confident, more confident than ever, that this thing's going to happen.
Sure.
It's going to take a while.
About 15 years they're looking at, I think?
They're looking at that possibly. I don't think it's going to take that long.
Sure.
Because once it gets going and you can see it's working, because that's how they're doing it. They're doing it in stages and little lumps. So if all of a sudden, you know, the schools start going up, the residents are happy, the crime rates are going down, et cetera, they're going to keep moving this thing as quickly as possible. I'm sure Harbison would want to get it over with as soon as possible so he can get on to the next ones.
I would ask, you know, because this is a 63-acre effort that is going to see that probably, well, at least $400 million pumped into it. The worry with gentrification, from what I understand, is a few things. Not only losing the community identity, but also taking the property values of an area and making them so high that people can't pay their taxes, or that people have, you know, are hamstrung by new obstacles. So I would ask you, if you've got Casey Homes right here, let's say, or the ENVISION CAYCE property, excuse me, is this right here, takes up, this is all 63 acres.
Thank you.
You've got neighborhoods right here, right here, right here, whatever. What happens, thank you so much, what happens to the property value of these guys not at Casey? Is their property value going to go up? And if so, if it does go up, will it be manageable for their finances?
Well,
what is
that's
the
an issue. I mean, we're all dealing with, here in East Nashville, we're going to be dealing with
Right.
Because now all of a sudden we're the place everybody wants to live in. And when I moved here 30 years ago, my mother was in tears and everything. She says, "You bought a house and you're moving here?" It's a condemned house. I showed it to her.
Right.
Anyhow, and it was slow, and the property values weren't going anywhere. We were just lucky that the banks would loan us the money so we could do these things.
Sure.
And but now there's no question, and the property values are getting obscene.
Right. So that is. Good.
The old residents, those of us who've been there 30 or more years, are concerned about exactly that. Our property taxes could get ridiculous, and most of us talk to each other and say we couldn't afford to live here now if it wasn't for the fact that we got in the ground when it was cheap.
Right.
And a lot of them have paid off their mortgages already. So the only expense they have to deal with is the increase in property taxes. So
you think that's going to happen either way?
Yeah, it's going to happen. And Casey will certainly add to the value of the property when you no longer have this low income develop excuse me, as part of the neighborhood. It'll make it even more inviting to be here.
Will the people who are in the adjacent neighborhoods be able to cope with that?
Well, we don't know. I don't know.
Good. Do you think anyone would have a viable answer to that outside of maybe an economics professor?
I don't know if they could. It's still going to be their best guess.
Good.
How people cope with it. Now, one of the things that residents are doing to cope with it, they're now, thanks to Airbnb and that kind of thing, they're renting out part of their houses.
Thank you
guys
so much.
want any dessert?
I'm solid, thank you.
Okay. Are we doing 1 or 2 tips?
Separate? You want to go Dutch on this?
It's fine with me.
Yeah, let's separate.
Separate?
I'll bring you a pie or something. I appreciate your time for Miss Daisy. I don't know if you like Miss Daisy's food or not.
Oh, I haven't been there.
She had a restaurant called the Tea Room in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. She was an owner of F. Scott's.
Oh, yeah, that I'm familiar with.
Well, I do her social media on the side, so I'll bring you a pie for your time.
Oh, all right, sounds
That
great.
works. Appreciate your. Anyway,
But anyhow, it's a tough call. And like I said, a lot of residents that are old-time ones are renting parts of their house out. In fact, one of my recent clients, she just paid off her mortgage. She moved in a few years when we moved into the neighborhood.
right.
And she paid off her mortgage. Now she's getting a refinance loan on there to remodel the house.
Oh,
And she's got somebody living upstairs with them as a
Right.
resident,
Right.
put in a separate entry. And that's offsetting the expenses there. And it's worked out great for her. And she wants her house to be remodeled so that she can die in it.
gotcha.
So make it handicap accessible, et cetera, make it easy to live in,
Sure.
easier when she becomes less mobile. So I expect that a lot of the residents here in East Nashville are going to be doing much the same thing.
Let me go back and ask something. You had said at the top of our dialogue, or close to the top of our dialogue, rather, that you had felt when you first started the foundation for Casey that there was this idea that the projects, and I don't mean the homes, I mean like the projects associated with getting these people out of poverty weren't working. That's the end game, right? To get people into public housing so they're not on the street, and then to springboard them to being productive, fruitful members of society. I would ask you, of the residents who will be in Casey homes, regardless of what happens of whether or not they move or whether or not they stay there. Let's assume that they do. How many of those people, in your mind's eye, are going to be able to get consistent, stable employment and be able to move either out of those hands or at least provide better opportunities for themselves? And how long will that take, do you think?
You will benefit greatly on that regard talking to Jim Harbison, because that's the kind of programs they're trying to set up, is to do exactly that. Likewise with Martha O'Brien. They're going to set up programs, teach them how to set a budget, work within their means, et cetera, all the way down the line there. And they don't want to bring this up, and I'm not sure if anybody would actually want to leave. If we do what that plan says we're going to do, why would you want to leave? The rates are good and so on and so forth, other than say, hey, I'm a productive member, I can afford to go out and buy a house somewhere else. But the thing is that this expense that some people are saying, and you may throw in the word gentrification if you want to call it that, but it's not in my mind. But it is being labeled that by many. He said, well, you're forcing the poor out of here. I said, are we? I said, we're making it more livable for them. We're providing support for the schools for them so they get a better education, and that these kids are motivated to graduate, go to college, and live somewhere else.
I would ask, though, going back to
wherever their jobs take them, I should say.
Sure. I would ask, though, going back to something we had talked about earlier, we had said that there was this process for vetting residents, and again, that goes on the subject of potential displacement. Whether or not gentrification is even a good thing or whatever, that's a chat for another time. I would ask you, how stringent do you expect these measures to be for the lower income residents? And also, are there any restrictions for the medium income residents?
Well, there's an interesting development that took. There's this corner of Cayce that was run by CWA, and they were more or less successful. The person who managed those properties would chase out the bad guys. If she saw strangers hot rodding through the neighborhood, she'd go right up to them and say,
"Thank you so much."
You're welcome.
She'd basically say, "Get out of here.
Right.
I'll call the police." And they said, and if you want to wonder who's calling the police on them, I said, you can look at me and say, I'm the one doing it, because I am the one doing it. And they didn't have anywhere near the problems that Cayce was, because Cayce wasn't enforcing their rules as they should have. And so the development that's happened now that Harbison has taken over, and CWA has moved their property into the Cayce bundle.
Yes.
Well, they have moved her up the ladder, given her more money, and want her to stay on as a manager of the properties.
Sure.
And so she's moving up the ladder.
Right.
So they understand that part of management is essential to the success of this, and Harbison understands that. So yes, I think there's going to be that type of thing, and things will get better in a variety of different ways.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Condensing what you said without putting words in your mouth, what I'm getting from the dialogue is that there is going to be diamond? Sorry, I was one of those phones. Condensing what you said, I would say it seems that there is an expectant amount of people who won't return to the property, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Exactly.
Okay. I want to make sure that I can pull that from you without.
Yeah, and I beginning to get the impression from the reaction we're getting from the neighborhood people is that it'll be a welcome change for them, that they're supportive of stricter enforcement, keeping the bad guys out, and so on and so forth. You know, they got their kids. They know that's not a good thing either.
Right.
So we're beginning to see more and more support for this. There are always going to be those who just sit there, oh, you're just forcing these people out, and so on and so forth.
I mean, arguably, and not you're not the one pulling the trigger, but arguably you are, I would say, forcing people out, but it's not that you're doing it at the detriment of the community, that you're more or less doing it at the benefit of the community if they're people who are the ne'er-do-wells of East Nashville,
The
right?
misbehaviors.
Right.
We're weeding the pack, you know. All people want the opportunity to live a decent life, you know,
Right.
and not feel threatened by anything. And so that is what happens. And if you want to label that gentrification, more power to you.
Gotcha. No, it's, I think, and that's the benefit of why I think, you know, I was able to get you to say that stuff, because I think a lot of people avoid that language, but I think that if you embrace it and say, well, what is gentrification, and is it necessarily a bad thing, and you're able to actually have an honest to goodness dialogue, you can remove some fear from people's minds. And that's why I appreciate your candor. So, but I appreciate it, thank you.
I mean, I look at what's going on now. The younger kids that are moving into our neighborhood, how the hell they get the money for it is beyond me, but they got it. Don't have the same passion for preservation, historic preservation that brought us here in the first place.
Sure.
Protection of the neighborhood, protection of its history,
Sure.
and so on. And most of them, well, I should say this, it'd be generalizing, and there's no real proof of it yet. But the real estate agents are reflecting over that. It says a lot of them are coming in here thinking they're buying low, and it's going to double in value, and so they can leave 5 years from now and earn a profit on their house because this is the upcoming neighborhood, and then move somewhere else. Well, my experience on that has been, where else am I going to go that's going to be any better than what we've got right now?
Sure.
I mean, we're close to downtown. We're close to every transportation artery you could ever hope for.
Right.
All the entertainment in the world now is here. You don't have to leave the neighborhood. You don't have to get in your car if you don't want to.
Sure.